Hey guys, tonight we're stepping away from numbers and equations and into something a little older, something a little dustier, but perhaps more useful, especially if you've ever found yourself without clean water, or say, without the faintest idea of how a toilet worked. In the 1300s, we're talking about medieval survival, not swords or dragons, but the real things. How people lived, how they kept clean, or didn't. Before we get too comfortable, take a second to like the video, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And if you have a moment, leave a comment. Where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? I always find it fascinating to know someone's listening from an apartment in Chicago, or a wooden cabin in British Columbia, a student in Boston, a truck driver pausing for the night in Oregon, all of us sharing a quiet moment. So now, it's time to turn off the lights. Maybe turn on a fan if you enjoy a little background noise. Pull the blanket up, let your mind drift, because tonight we travel, not by horse or cart, but by imagination, into a world faded and old, not loud, but with a quiet curiosity. Let's begin. They wake before the light, not because they choose to, but because life demands it. There is no alarm, no cocky sunrise peeking through glass windows, only a deep greyness pressing down through the thatched roof, and the faint stirrings of a rooster, too tired himself to crow properly. The hut is cold, not the kind of cold you can chase away with extra blankets. It's the kind that has crept in slowly over the night, under the door, between the stones, through the rafters, until everything it touches stiffens in silence. They lie still for a moment, listening. The air has a particular quiet this hour. Not peaceful, not ominous, just expectant. Beside them, their wife lies curled inward, buried beneath layers of linen, wool, and familiarity. At the foot of the straw mattress, a child sleeps with open mouth and twitching feet, chasing something in dreams that might be warmer than this room. Their eyes adjust to the dark. No candle is lit. That would be wasteful. Firewood was hard to find this week, and what remains must be saved for boiling water. They sit up. Their back cracks, not sharply, but like wood flexing in cold. The blanket slides off, and the real temperature of the room wraps itself around their skin like wet cloth. There is no floorboard to step on, only packed dirt. Cold, hard, familiar. They reach for their tunic, hanging from a wooden peg, hammered into the mud brick wall. The fabric is stiff, damp from the night. They pull it over their head anyway, because time does not wait for clothes to soften. A bucket rests near the door. Yesterday's water, still half full, still icy. They dip a hand in, a quick splash to the face. The cold is shocking, but it serves its purpose, not to refresh, but to wake. No one speaks. There's no need. Mornings are not for conversation. Not here. Words are a luxury spent after the chores begin. The hearth stands at the center of the home, not just a place to cook, but the heart of warmth, light, and life itself. But this morning, it is only a shadow of those things. The fire died sometime after midnight. No one fed it. No one dared to waste the wood. What little kindling they had left was needed for the pot later. They kneel by the stone frame and brush aside the ashes. The coals are cold. No embers hide beneath the grey. Just brittle wood dust, the ghosts of last night's fire. Their hand finds a charred stick. They lift it, tap it once against the iron pot. It breaks clean in half. Nothing left inside. The smell that lingers is one of soot and smoke soaked into clay. Not unpleasant, but old. They remember their father sitting in this same spot, long ago, blowing carefully into the dying flame, whispering a prayer to Saint Bridget, patroness of fire and warmth. That was a different time, when winters felt kinder, or perhaps they were just younger. Now, there is only the morning silence and a chill that moves like a living thing through the room. They take a bit of dry straw and a few twigs from the basket in the corner, gently, as if waking a baby. They stack them into a small pyramid in the hearth's belly, then flint and steel, a practiced rhythm, strike, spark, strike again, until, finally, a flicker of light dances, orange and nervous. They cup their hands around it, coaxing it forward, breathing life into it, like feeding a bird that barely trusts them. The flame catches, the straw curls inward, the twigs pop and hiss. A thread of smoke rises and disappears into the chimney stones. There will be no feast cooked here, only water boiled, maybe an onion warmed through, but for now, the flame lives, and that is enough. They sit back on their heels, let the heat touch their fingers, let it remind them, just for a moment, that they're alive. The warmth begins to spread, not far, but enough to paint soft light onto the faces still sleeping. They turn back toward the bed, a heap of cloth, wool, and limbs. There's no such thing as privacy in a one-room hut, but there is familiarity, and in that, a quiet kind of intimacy. Their wife stirs slightly, not fully awake, just a shift, like a wave rolling in a calm sea. A strand of hair slips over her eyes, and she brushes it away without opening them. Her face is thin, the years have not been gentle, but in sleep, she looks peaceful. You might even call it beautiful, in the way that endurance itself can be beautiful. At the edge of the straw mattress, a child is tangled in a blanket. One foot sticks out, small, dirty, bruised from playing near the pig pen, but still chubby enough to remind them that the child is not yet grown. They watch, just for a moment, these two people, sleeping, breathing, alive. It is a simple sight, but never taken for granted. In a world where illness steals silently, where a cough can mean a death, where the midwife's hands are calloused from grief, every morning with the ones you love still near is a victory. They reach for a worn cloth and gently cover the child's exposed foot. It's not enough to keep out the cold, but it's what they have. Then they rise. There is work to be done. The fire is catching, but the chores are waiting. There will be time to speak later, brief words, small smiles, perhaps a story at dusk if the day has been kind, but for now, they let them sleep, a gift. While outside, the sky begins to shift from black to blue, quietly, like the breath of someone who has seen many mornings and still greets the next with hope. The kitchen, if it can be called that, is little more than a wooden table and a shelf. Everything they own fits into 3 baskets, a few clay pots, and a single iron pan, blackened from years of use. But it's enough. On the table sits a hunk of bread, dark, dense, 2 days old. It looks more like a brick than something meant to be eaten. They pick it up. It has the weight of something that could break a window, or a tooth, but it is food, and food is not wasted. With a wooden knife, they scrape. Thin shavings fall to the plate like curls of dry wood. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes care not to splinter the blade or cut a finger. Next, they pour a ladle of water into a small pot and place it over the weak fire. No oil, no milk, no butter, just water and heat. The bread curls in the steam, softens a little, not much, but enough to chew without bleeding. They look to the shelf. An onion, small, wrinkled, but still pungent enough to sting the eyes when cut. They take half, slice it thin. It will be shared. In a corner pot, wrapped in cloth, is the cheese, sour, hard, crusted with a white edge, not mould, but close. They cut off a bit, smell it, decide it's still edible, barely. There is salt, too. Not much. A thumb-sized pinch wrapped in a leather scrap. A gift from a travelling trader weeks ago, bartered for eggs. They sprinkle it sparingly. Too much, and it's gone. Too little, and it's like chewing rope. No one in this house will complain, not because they don't care, but because complaint is useless. It does not make more food appear. The children will eat first, then their wife. They will eat last and least. That is the rhythm. A piece of bread, a sliver of onion, a whisper of cheese, and a hope that tomorrow brings more. And still, they give thanks. Not out loud, not in long prayers, but in small actions. The careful way the food is divided, the quiet nod exchanged between 2 tired parents, the gentle touch on a child's shoulder as a bowl is passed, because today there is food, and that is enough. Morning moves not with a bang, but with rhythm. A soft unfolding, a familiar pattern worn smooth by repetition. They do not need to speak. The work speaks for them. The child finishes their meal and quietly places the empty bowl on the floor. No whining, no asking for more. They've learned early. What is given is what there is. Their wife begins sweeping, not with a broom of bristles, but with bundled twigs tied together by a length of cloth. She starts at the corner and moves in tight arcs, brushing dust, straw, and tiny bones toward the center. The sound it makes is soft, so soft it's almost like breathing. There are no windows in this home, only a small square opening, stuffed with fabric at night, now unsealed to let in the dull morning light. It filters in like fog, not strong enough to warm, but enough to see. They pull on boots stiff with yesterday's mud. The leather groans, as if it too is tired. By the door hangs the same wool cap they've worn every day for 7 winters, threadbare, more whole than cloth, but it keeps the wind out of their ears. Mostly. They check the hooks by the wall, a bag for grain, still empty, a small sickle with a chipped blade, a rope coiled like a sleeping snake. Everything is where it should be, because in a life where so little is certain, placement is peace, a glance is shared, not a question, just a confirmation. Are we ready? Yes. The child is bundled into their tunic. No shoes, feet too small, and the only pair left now belongs to their older sibling who walked to the manor 2 days ago. Still no word, but no news is good news. They open the door. The air outside greets them not with wind, but with weight. Moist, heavy, full of the smell of mud, damp hay, and life waiting in silence. They step into the day, not with dread, but with acceptance. Because the ritual is not just routine, it is survival, and survival, here, is sacred. The door creaks open on a wooden hinge smoothed by time and oil from countless hands. Cold air rushes in like a quiet guest, uninvited but expected. They step outside. Boots sink slightly into the soft earth, still wet from last night's mist. The ground exhales a scent, not sweet, not foul, just alive. Mist hangs low over the fields, not the kind that blinds, but the kind that blurs. Edges soften, trees become shadows. The world feels hushed, as if it too is holding its breath. Above, the sky is pale blue, tinged with ash grey. No sun yet. But light is coming. The chickens murmur softly in their pen, feathers puffed up like cloaks. One pig snorts from the far side of the yard, rooting lazily in half-frozen mud. Its breath steams in the morning chill. A dog barks faintly from another homestead, then falls silent again. In the corner, a wooden trough still holds some water, now covered with a thin skin of ice. They crack it with a stick. The sound, sharp, clean, cuts through the quiet like a bell. Every step leaves a mark. Not just in the soil, but in the day, because once they begin, there is no turning back. Work waits, and it waits for no one. They look out across the land, not theirs. They work it, sleep beside it, break their back for it, but it belongs to the manor. Still, they know every curve of the field, every stubborn root, every place the wind whips harder. This is theirs in spirit, if not by law. They inhale deeply, the air burns a little. But in that burn is a kind of awakening. Today will be like yesterday, and tomorrow will likely be the same. But in this moment, this still, biting moment, there is clarity. They are alive. And the world, for all its coldness, continues. They pick up the yoke, resting against the side of the hut. Time to fetch the ox. Time to begin again. The tools are always in the same place, hung beside the door or tucked beneath the lean-to by the side of the hut. Not because anyone told them to keep it that way, but because forgetting would cost time. And time, out here, is not a thing freely spent. First, the yoke. Worn wood, darkened from sweat and weather, smoothed by years of resting on strong shoulders, both human and animal. They lift it with practiced ease. It creaks slightly, like old bones. Next, the plough blade. Iron, dull with age, not rust. They sharpened it last week with a whetstone by candlelight, eyes barely open. It will hold, hopefully. Rope, frayed at the ends, is coiled neatly around a peg. They unwind it carefully, not because it's fragile, but because rope is valuable. A broken rope means a runaway ox. A runaway ox means a ruined morning. Beside the rope lies a hoe, handle splintered, wrapped in leather for grip. It's the same one their father used. And before him, their grandfather. At least that's what they say. No one's written it down, but the wear on the wood tells its own history. A cloth sack contains smaller tools, hooks, nails, a bent knife for harvesting herbs that only grow by the river in late spring. They won't need that today, but they bring it anyway, just in case. Everything is checked, touched, assessed without a word. Hands know what to feel for. Weight, balance, the quiet language of labour. The ox is waiting. She knows the sound of morning prep. Even before she sees them, she shifts in her stall, snorts, stamps a hoof, not impatient, just ready. They approach with the yoke in hand, no whip, no harsh words, just routine. Ox and human, bound not by affection, but by necessity. The harness slips over her shoulders. The yoke falls into place with a thunk. The sound echoes across the yard, and the day officially begins. The path to the field is worn bare, not carved by wheels but by feet, human and hoof, treading the same route day after day, year after year. Even in fog, they could walk it with eyes closed, and sometimes they nearly do. Frost still clings to the low grass. Each blade glistens under the first weak touch of sunlight, like nature trying to remember how to glow. Birdsong begins, tentative at first, a distant thrush, a sharp chirp from the hedgerow. Life is waking. The ox plods ahead steadily, each step leaving deep prints in the wet soil. Its breath forms small clouds, rising and vanishing like whispered prayers. They reach the edge of the plot, small by the standards of the manor, but large enough to demand everything they have. Square-shaped, bordered by stones too heavy to move. It's theirs to tend, at least for now, until the Lord decides otherwise. They set the blade, lower the wooden frame, test the tension of the rope. All familiar, all routine, and yet every morning feels like a new negotiation with the land. Will it cooperate? Will it resist? Will it provide? The ox groans, a low, steady sound, not complaint, just communication. And then, movement. The plough bites the earth and the first furrow opens like a wound. Wet soil peels aside, dark, rich, promising. They walk behind, hand on the yoke, eyes on the line. Step, breathe, pull, adjust. They do not speak. Even if someone were beside them, words would feel out of place here. This is not a place for chatter. This is where thoughts settle into the rhythm of labor, where the world shrinks to a line in the dirt. One furrow, then another, and another. The sun rises slowly, never in a hurry. Its light warms the back of their neck as they move up and down the plot, back and forth, again and again. Behind them, the field is transformed, messy earth turned in neat rows, not beautiful in a painter's way, but in a quiet, necessary way, in the way that reminds you this is how bread is born. The stomach rumbles. They don't stop. Not yet. There's still so much left to do. But for now, there's something satisfying about seeing a line of earth split perfectly in two. One man, one ox, one day, starting again. The field is never still. Even when no one works it, it changes. Weeds creep in. Roots twist deeper. Birds scratch the surface looking for seeds left behind. And beneath it all, the earth breathes. Slow, steady, unbothered by who owns it, or who claims to. The peasant knows this. They've watched it change, season after season. The edge that floods in spring. The patch where turnips never grow. The stubborn corner with soil too rocky for anything but barley. This land is not generous, but it can be persuaded, with time, with sweat, with patience, always patience. They pull the ox and plough in a long, slow loop, turning the earth row by row, each pass a small victory. Their hands ache from gripping the wooden handle, palms blistered from years of this exact motion, but they do not stop, because the field will not till itself, and neither the Lord nor the sky offers mercy. Half the day is gone. The sun sits high now, though hidden behind a gauzy veil of clouds. No shade, but no burning heat either, just a grey stillness. The peasant rests the ox beneath a gnarled tree near the plot's edge. They wipe sweat from their brow with a sleeve already stiff with dust. No one speaks, no one needs to. They kneel and reach into their cloth sack. Lunch, not a meal, a survival, a thin heel of bread, a few dry beans, rolled in linen, a sliver of onion, sliced in the morning, and water, warm, murky, drawn from a stream that flows too close to the animals, but it's enough to hold the body, not to nourish, but to continue, and that's all the afternoon requires. Nearby, the ox chews lazily at grass near the fence, its rhythm slow, meditative, a reminder that not all work is frantic, some of it is just constant. There are others in the field, not many, just shapes moving in the mist, distant figures bent over tools, like scarecrows with breath. They do not wave. No one expects conversation here. The land takes all the energy. What's left is saved for the walk home. One figure is familiar. Old Martin. Everyone calls him that, though no one remembers how old he really is. He's been here as long as the village remembers. He walks with a slight limp, favouring his right side. Years ago, they say, a mule kicked him. Or maybe it was a fever. Or maybe just time, doing what time does. But he still works. slow, deliberate, a rhythm carved into his spine, like the plough lines he draws, crooked but never wasted. Sometimes he hums while he digs, a low, rasping tune that doesn't quite have a melody. It's not for anyone else, just a habit like checking the sky. He glances up and nods. That's enough, a whole greeting in one motion. Years ago, they say, Martin had a son, strong boy, left for the city, for work or war or both, never came back. Martin doesn't speak of it, but sometimes, when the wind is soft, he stares toward the far road and grips the handle of his hoe too tight. There are many like Martin, men who stayed. Not because they were too weak to leave, but because they didn't want to forget what had grown here. Who had grown here? Their loyalty is not to the Lord, not to the system, but to the soil, to memory, to ghosts only they can name. The handle of the hoe is like a branch, smooth in some places, splintered in others. It presses against the same calluses every day, digging deeper into the layers of skin made for this life. Thick palms are not born, they are built, blister by blister, season by season. By midday, the sweat has dried into a layer of salt. It stings, but worse is the ache. Not sharp, not screaming, just there, settled into the bones like a tenant who pays no rent and never leaves. They shift their grip, try to favor the left hand, but it's all the same. Both arms are tired, both shoulders burn. They keep moving. Because fields don't finish themselves. Because hunger doesn't pause when the back begins to hurt. Because if they don't, someone else will. And then the Lord might ask why they were slower. They think, sometimes, about other ways to live. A life as a tanner, a cobbler, a priest even. But that was never an option. They were born here. The land knew them before they had teeth, and now it owns them, even if the scroll in the manor says otherwise. They bend again. Weeds, stones, roots. The earth fights back, always, as if it too resents being told what to grow. Their knuckles bleed, a thorn maybe, or a sharp sliver of buried bone from an animal long dead. They don't stop. They press the thumb over the wound, pack it with soil, and keep going. It will scab, or it won't. Pain is not a reason to rest, not here, not ever. And yet, even as the hands split, even as the back curls from hours of strain, there is something else. A rhythm, a strange peace in the repetition. Push, pull, plant, step. They may be bent, but they are not broken. And in that, there is something stronger than comfort. There is endurance. Hunger does not announce itself with drums. It creeps in, quiet as fog. It waits between breaths. It sharpens the air. It settles in the stomach like a second heartbeat. By now, the morning bread is long gone, just a memory of chew. The body burns it quickly, turning it into muscle, motion, breath. And what's left is absence, an emptiness that wraps itself around the ribs and waits. This kind of hunger isn't new. It's not panic. It's not fear. It's just company. It joins them in the field, walks beside them as they dig, stands behind them while they mend the fence. It's there when they sit for a moment to stretch their back, a quiet reminder that dinner might be no better than breakfast. Some days are good, days when they can trade eggs or fetch a small fish from the stream, days when a neighbour shares broth from a larger pot. But those days are rare. Most days are like this, a fading meal, a slow ache, the mind wandering toward food it has never tasted, roasted meat, warm pies, fresh milk with foam still on top, things they have seen only at the manor house or in dreams. They don't resent it, not truly. This is just how it is. Just as the sun rises and falls, so too does the stomach wait and empty and wait again. Still, there's always hope for something better. Maybe a rabbit in a snare, maybe a neighbour with too much barley flour, maybe the peddler comes early and trades a sack of salt for firewood. Maybe, always maybe, and maybe, tonight there'll be stew. Not thick, not rich, but hot and shared, and that is enough. For now they keep working, hunger walks behind them, but they do not stop. Because the only way to eat tomorrow is to labour today. The manor always stands in view, distant, quiet, unmoving, like a stone that forgot how to fall. Perched atop the only real hill for miles, it watches everything. Fields, paths, people. Even the river bends slightly toward it, as if out of habit. Its roof is real tile. Its windows have shutters, sometimes even glass. At night, candles glow behind those shutters, like stars pretending they belong on earth. The peasant doesn't hate the manor, they simply understand it. It's a different world, one they're tethered to but never invited into. A world of linen and wine, of meat with every meal, of hands that rarely touch dirt and boots that never need mending. Sometimes, when the wind is right, they can hear laughter from its halls, not the rough, cracked kind from the village fire pit, but a smoother sound, lighter, like it doesn't cost anything to make. They've delivered firewood there before. Once, years ago, they even stepped into the kitchen. It was warm, too warm, the walls thick with the smell of roasted goose and herbs they didn't recognize. A servant, better dressed than anyone in the village, handed them a coin and didn't look them in the eye. That was enough. They never returned. But the manor still looms. Its stone walls don't rot. Its animals are fat. Its fields are larger, tended by others. And the people inside? They give orders. They attend mass in the front pew. They appear at festivals wearing velvet and speaking French. Yet even they are not safe. Last winter, the steward's youngest died of fever. The candle burned in their window, same as in the peasant's hut. Grief, it seems, doesn't respect stone walls or silk sleeves. Still, when the peasant glances up from the plough, it is always there, watching, waiting, enduring. A reminder, not all hunger is for food. Some hunger is for fairness. Some for rest. Some simply for a view where the world feels less heavy. But even from afar, the manor never speaks. And so, the peasant lowers their gaze and returns to the dirt. The first drop lands on the ox's back, then another, and another. Not a storm, not yet, just the sky clearing its throat. The peasant looks up. The clouds have thickened, pressed low like a damp wool blanket. The air changes, heavier now, filled with the scent of wet soil and smoke from distant chimneys. They should stop, they know it, but there are still rows unfinished. Still weeds to clear, still a list of tasks that never truly ends, so they press on. The rain quickens, not enough to drench, just enough to smear, to turn furrows into trenches, to make the earth cling to boots like glue. Each step is a battle. Boots sink, tools slip, the ox's hooves splash into thickening puddles, and mud spatters upward onto everything. The peasant doesn't curse, that would waste breath. They simply adjust, shoulders forward, knees bent. They've walked in worse. They've planted seeds in sleet. They've dug graves in snow. Still, this is a test, not of strength, but of will. Hands grow numb. The damp seeps into the sleeves. The rope grows slick. At some point, the plough sticks, snagged on a root or stone. They groan, lean their whole weight against it, teeth clenched. A long moment, then, snap. The root gives. They stumble back, knees catching the earth, mud on the palms, mud on the face, mud in the mouth. They sit for a moment, breathing, letting the rain tap against their shoulders. It doesn't feel cruel, just inevitable. They murmur a prayer, not a grand one, not to saints with jeweled crowns, just a whisper to the Virgin, a few words, a breath of hope wrapped in silence, not for riches, not even for sun, just let the barley sprout, let the cow not sicken, let the roof hold this winter. It's not much, but in the mud, with the world soaked and grey, it is enough. They rise, they press forward, one furrow more. Time does not rush here, it does not sprint, it trudges, like the ox, like the plough, like the man who follows both. Each hour stretches, wide and empty, marked not by clocks, but by muscle and sweat, by the tilt of light, by the soft creak of leather straps growing looser as the day wanes. They do not count time in minutes. They count it in furrows, in buckets of water drawn, in fences mended, in how long it takes to wear a new pair of boots down to holes. The seasons are their calendar. Spring smells of wet straw, summer of manure and ripening grain, autumn tastes of wood smoke and drying onions, and winter is the sound of coughing in the dark. There's no retirement, no rest once the body slows. You just do a little less. Maybe you dig shallower. Maybe someone else carries the pail. But the day still begins before the sun, and it ends only when the sky has swallowed the last of the light. Some men age before they grey. Their backs bend from labour. Their hands become claws, curled from gripping tools too long. Even their eyes, not dimmed by years, but from squinting into wind, dust, and smoke. Children grow up watching this, and still, they follow it. Because what else is there? The land gives no other path, the manor gives no invitation, the church offers only prayers, and those do not fill the stomach. So they wait, not for escape, not for change, but for harvest. For the 1 week a year when time pays back its debt, when the wheat stands tall, when the air hums with work, but also with hope, and even then, the joy is short. The tax collector comes, the Lord's men weigh their share, rats take what's left in the night, but still, it is something, a flicker, a breath, a small reward for time's endless hunger. So they labour, they endure, and the days, long and grey, pile one upon another, until time forgets their name, but remembers the work. It isn't a grand tree. Its trunk twists slightly, like it grew around something that once stood there. Its bark is cracked, its leaves sparse, but it's enough. Enough to cast a shadow, enough to lean against. The peasant reaches it just past midday, not for shade. The sun isn't fierce today, but for stillness, the kind that only trees seem to understand. They lower themselves slowly, one hand on the bark, knees sighing as they bend. The earth is cool beneath them. The smell of soil, sweat, and crushed grass mingles in the air. For a few minutes, they just breathe, not deeply, not dramatically, just enough to feel that they are, in fact, still breathing. Around them, the world continues. A beetle crawls across a root. The ox flicks its tail at a fly. A bird calls once, then silence. In this quiet, the mind loosens. Thoughts that had been buried beneath labour begin to rise. Not dreams, no. Dreams are luxuries, but fragments, faces, moments, memories without names. A sibling who died young. The scent of fresh rye bread in a neighbour's home. A song half remembered, hummed by a mother who worked her hands raw and still managed to smile at sunset. These are not ghosts, not quite, but they visit all the same. A breeze stirs the leaves. The tree creaks softly, as if offering its own memory. The peasant leans their head back, eyes closed. A moment, a breath. No one calls. No one needs them for now. And in this pause, this sliver of a moment too small to call peace, there is something sacred, not holy in the way priests speak, but sacred in the way all small mercies are. They whisper a quiet thanks, not to the tree, not to the sky, but to the fact that, just for a minute, they are not moving, not digging, not hauling, just being. And when the moment passes, as it must, they stand again, a little slower, but lighter, because even the heaviest burdens weigh less after one breath beneath a tree. Back at the hut, they wait. Small hands pressed to the window's edge. Faces smudged with flour, with soot, with life. The children don't understand the field. Not fully. They know it's important. They know food comes from it somehow. But they've never followed a plough until dusk. Never watched the sun crawl across the same patch of sky for hours and still find it empty. Still, they wait. Sometimes they play with sticks, pretending to be knights, or they chase the chickens, or they curl in the corner of the hearth and watch the smoke twist, telling stories about dragons that live in chimneys. But when the shadows lengthen and the light softens, they begin to listen. For footsteps, for the slow creak of the door, for the sound that means the day is over and someone has come home. The eldest helps, sweeps the floor, fetches water, sings the baby to sleep with a tune barely remembered from their own infancy. Responsibility comes early here, like hunger, like winter. Sometimes when the youngest asks, "Where's Papa?" the answer is simple, "In the field." That's always the answer. It's always true. The children do not complain. They're used to absence, to long hours and tired smiles, but they notice everything. They see how the shoulders stoop more each week, how the hands shake slightly when lifting the bowl, how the eyes stay on the fire a little too long. They do not have words for it, but they carry it, in silence, in small gestures, in the way they leave the softest piece of bread untouched, saving it for someone else. And maybe, just maybe, they dream of something else. Not of castles or riches, but of shorter days, of shoes without holes, of a home where laughter lasts a little longer than the bread. The first refusal is small, a knee that locks for just a second too long, a wrist that doesn't twist quite right. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth stopping for. They press on. as always, because pain is part of the deal, part of the soil, part of the weight they agreed to carry the day they first lifted a hoe. But the second refusal comes louder. The back seizes, the shoulder jolts with fire, the breath becomes shallow, each inhale edged with sharpness. Still, they keep moving until they can't, and that moment, when the body says no, is terrifying, because there is no safety net, no coin saved for rest, no other hands to take the work. To stop is not to recover. To stop is to fall behind. To stop is to risk hunger, to risk being seen as weak, to risk being replaced. They sit on a stone at the edge of the field, hands trembling. The ox chews lazily, unbothered. The plough leans, its blade half buried in soil that no longer moves. And for a long moment they wonder, is this it? Has the work finally outlived the worker? But the earth doesn't care. It doesn't pause. The sun does not adjust its path. The weeds do not grow more slowly. So they reach for something deeper than strength. Not muscle, not pride, but will. Raw and stripped. The last spark before the dark. They rise, not because they're ready, but because no one else will. They drag the tool forward. Just one more row, just one more step, just one more hour. And somehow the body listens, not eagerly, not kindly, but enough. They will pay for this tonight, in cramps, in fevered dreams, in silence, but the field will be done, and sometimes that is what survival demands. The field never speaks. It does not thank. It does not praise. It does not curse. It simply takes the seed, takes the sweat, takes the bones of those too tired to leave. But still, the peasant returns, day after day, year after year, because even if the earth forgets their name, it remembers their touch. The path to the field is worn, not just by feet, but by generations. Father, mother, grandfather, daughter, each with their own steps, each carrying the same burden, wrapped in different years. Sometimes they wonder what remains. After all the labor, after all the bending, digging, planting, praying, will the earth remember them? Will anything? The answer is quiet. But it's there, in the straightness of the row, in the patch that grows greener, in the fence that still holds, in the child who watches, learns, and one day walks the same path, not because they must, but because they know no other way. They pause at the field's edge as the sun dips low. The light turns gold. Everything is still, just for a breath. Behind them, footprints. Ahead, tomorrow. They press a hand to the soil. Rough, cool, alive. It says nothing, but it holds everything. The toil, the hunger, the fleeting moments of rest, the hopes whispered into wind and rain. This is where they've lived. This is where they've endured. And when they are gone, this is where some part of them will remain. Not in stories, not in songs, but in the way the soil turns easier in spring, because hands like theirs once made it so. It begins with a whisper, not from the church bell, not from the steward's tally, but from the air itself, cooler in the morning, softer in the afternoon, carrying with it the scent of something different, not just damp earth or old hay, but smoke from torches, spices not grown in local gardens, and soap a luxury saved for days that mattered. Word spread slowly, from one neighbour to another, passed between women at the well and old men sharpening blades. There's a feast day coming, a saint's day, a fair, not one of the grand ones, not the king's tourney or a royal market, but a humble festival held a day's walk away, blessed by the abbey, tolerated by the Lord, and long awaited by everyone else. The children are the first to count down the days, not with numbers, but with questions. Is it tomorrow yet? Will there be honey cakes? Do they still have the painted puppets? Will we see the fire dancers this time? The adults act indifferent at first, but soon even the most stoic father starts patching his tunic. The mother opens the chest that stays locked all year, searching for the cloth with the least stains, the shoes with the fewest holes. Everything feels a little lighter, not easier. The fields still demand their due. The cows still need milking. The firewood still must be chopped. But there's a hum in the air, like a tune everyone knows, but no one dares sing aloud just yet. They talk of the fair over supper, speculate which traders might come. Will the man with the bright ribbons be there? The one with the dancing monkey? Or the woman who sells almonds roasted in honey and dusted with salt? They speak in low tones, as if saying it too loudly might curse it, as if the weather might overhear and decide to flood the road, or the steward might change his mind and demand double tithe that week. But the hope holds. Even the priest, stiff-backed and frowning most days, mentions the feast of St. Elgiva with something close to warmth in his voice. And so, preparations begin. The morning of the fair arrives not with trumpet or bell, but with the soft rustle of cloth being tied, boots being pulled over tired feet, and the hush of breath held tight with anticipation. They rise earlier than usual, not for work, but for wonder, for the kind of day that breaks routine like a wheel rolling free from its track. The children are dressed first, wiped down with water warmed over the hearth, their hair combed roughly with fingers, their cheeks flushed, not from fever, but excitement. The adults follow, one tunic repaired for the 10th time, a shawl that once belonged to a grandmother, old but cherished. These are their best garments, not beautiful but clean, and today, that is enough. They carry with them little, a pouch of copper coins, some dried bread wrapped in cloth, a turnip for the road, a wooden toy, carved months ago but saved for a day like this, and they walk. The road is not short, but it is familiar. It winds past the fields, their fields, but they do not pause to look. Today, those rows of soil and stone do not own them. They pass others, neighbours, some old friends, some barely spoken to in years. But today, all are greeted. A nod, a smile, a word of blessing. Children race ahead. Mothers call them back. Fathers shake their heads and grin in ways they forgot they could. The road begins to hum with life. A man with a pipe plays a tune, uneven but joyful. A girl sings softly to her younger brother. Some walk with carts, others with nothing but their feet and their hopes. Every step feels lighter, as if the burdens they always carry, hunger, labour, grief, have stayed behind, just for a little while. They talk on the road, of what they'll buy, what they hope to see. Stories from past fairs, the time the juggler dropped a torch on the reeve's boot, or when the cloth merchant turned out to be a priest in disguise. As they near the rise in the hill, the one that hides the valley where the fair takes place, everyone grows quiet. There's a reverence, almost, like entering a church, like approaching something sacred. Then they crest the hill, and there it is, tents, flags, the shimmer of metal and colour and sound, a patch of chaos and wonder stitched into the green of the world. And every face, even the oldest, lights up. They walk faster now, not because they must, but because the world is waiting, and for once, it is a world made not of work, but of joy. The fair is not large, not by noble standards, no silks from the east, no trained falcons, but for those who walk from the villages, those who work the land, who bleed into the soil. It is dazzling. The colours hit first. Banners flutter above merchant stalls, cloth dyed red and gold, green and blue hues they never see in daily life. Everything moves. Everything glimmers in the sun. Even the dust kicked up by feet seems to sparkle. Then the sounds, lutes and flutes, tambourines clinking in rhythm, voices calling out wares, children laughing, chickens squawking, a dog barking at a juggler balancing on a barrel. It's a tapestry of noise, chaotic but beautiful. The smell, oh the smell, roasted meat, sweet wine warming in a pot, cinnamon and clove, fresh bread baked on stone, cheese melting over coals, honey cakes crisping in lard. For some, it's the first time in months they've smelled sugar, or meat, or anything other than cabbage and smoke. The peasant's mouth waters, but their coin pouch is thin. Still just one cake, just one warm bun, handed over by a smiling vendor whose teeth are mostly gone. The sweetness hits like a hymn, and they chew slowly, reverently. They walk through the stalls. There's no real shopping list, but they pause at the spice trader, a man with yellow fingers and a strange accent. He lets them smell a pouch of dried rosemary, and for a moment, it feels like a spell. They linger at the cloth table, run calloused hands over linen, think of the winter to come, of holes to patch, But they don't buy. Not today. Instead, they watch. A man breathing fire. A woman dancing on stilts. A boy tossing 3 apples so high they seem to disappear into the sun. They stop at a booth with carved toys. Tiny horses, crude whistles, little dolls made from straw and scrap. The child tugs their sleeve. And this time, they buy something. A wooden duck on wheels. Painted red, with one eye slightly off-center. It'll be a treasure for years. Then, the puppet show. Crude voices. Simple jokes. But the children shriek with laughter. And even the elders chuckle. There is no message. No lesson. Just a moment of joy. At the edge of the fair, a man preaches. Fire in his voice. Eyes wild, with warnings of sin and hell. But no one listens for long. Not today. Not here. A singer takes over. Old ballads. Tales of knights and lost love. Of birds that speak and rivers that run backwards. The peasant closes their eyes. Lets the voice carry them. Not to sleep, but to somewhere softer. Somewhere better. And for those few hours, the world is not hunger, not pain, not labor. It is color, and sound, and sweetness. It is life, unburdened. It begins with one flute. Soft, wandering, a melody searching for a partner. Then another joins a drum, low and steady. A heartbeat, and people begin to gather. No stage, no instructions. Just a clearing in the grass where someone once danced, and others followed. A ring forms. Slowly, tentatively. Children jump in first, spinning like leaves in a gust of wind. Then the older ones' eyes shy, feet unsure. Then, finally, the groan. The ones who have forgotten how. The peasant stands at the edge at first, watching, listening. But the rhythm pulls at something old inside them. Something buried. Something that once knew joy without shame. Someone offers a hand. A friend. A cousin. A stranger. It doesn't matter. They take it. The circle moves. Not perfectly, but beautifully. Bare feet on grass. Bodies swaying. Laughter rising like smoke toward the early stars. There are no steps to memorize. Only moments to surrender to. Hands clap in time. Voices lift in song, not the kind sung in church, but the kind sung to the moon when no one else is listening. The peasant laughs, a real laugh. It startles them. They can't remember the last one. It feels strange. It feels good. A boy tries to twirl a girl and stumbles. She catches him, then twirls away on purpose, arms high. A man claps off beat, but grins like a fool and keeps going. An old woman nearly bent double from age sways gently at the edge, her cane tapping the rhythm into the earth. There are no rich here, no poor, just feet, and grass, and a night that does not punish. As the sun vanishes, the sky softens into blue-grey velvet. The first stars blink awake. Someone brings out a jug of cider. It passes from hand to hand, each sip sweeter than the last, not from flavor but from sharing. And when the music slows, not stops, never truly stops, they all sit, or lie back, or lean into each other. No one wants to be first to leave. No one says it, but everyone knows. This moment will not come again soon. So they let it stretch. Let the night breathe. Let their souls rest. They won't remember the dance perfectly, but they'll remember the feeling of being free. If only for a while. The fair does not end with a bang. There are no final fireworks. No closing speech. It simply fades. A vendor lowers his awning. A juggler packs away his coloured balls. The fire eater spits his last flame and disappears into the smoke. And people begin to drift. Not all at once, but in soft ripples, like waves retreating from shore. The peasant gathers their things. There's not much. A half-eaten loaf. A carved duck tucked into a fold of cloth. A ribbon tied in a child's hair. Their feet are tired, but lighter than they were this morning. Their shoulders still ache, but the ache feels easier to bear. They say goodbye to neighbours they rarely speak to on ordinary days. They smile at strangers. They walk without speaking, but with a silence full of warmth. The road home feels shorter somehow, as if the joy of the day carries them forward, like a breeze behind the back. Children fall asleep on shoulders. Mothers carry them without complaint. Fathers hum old tunes they forgot they remembered. The sky darkens, not ominously, but gently. The stars return, and the moon, now nearly full, keeps watch above the trees. They pass the stream they crossed that morning. The water still gurgles the same way, but now it feels different, as if it, too, carries the echo of drums and flutes. One child wakes briefly and whispers, "Will there be another fair?" The parent smiles. "Next year, maybe." The child nods and drifts again. At the village edge, the fires are already out. The homes sit still, waiting. The smell of old smoke and dry hay returns. But it doesn't sting like it did yesterday. They step inside the hut, place the toy gently on the table, the ribbon in a wooden bowl, take off their shoes, unravel their shawl, and breathe. It is the same home, the same walls, the same cracked bowl and crooked beam, but the heart is different, filled with something fragile and fleeting, but real. Hope. They lie down, exhausted, content. Outside, a fox crosses the path. The wind hums through the straw roof. Inside, sleep comes easily. The fair is over. But the joy, quiet and stubborn, remains. It came quietly, as it always did. Not with trumpets, not with snow, but with a hush. A kind of stillness that made the birds pause longer on the fence posts. A breath in the trees that didn't quite belong to summer anymore. The leaves had not yet turned, but their green had dulled. The wind changed direction, and the nights began to stretch out, just a little longer, just enough to be noticed. In the village, no one said the word winter yet. It was too soon. But they reached for thicker tunics, stuffed old rags in the gaps beneath the door, and began to sleep closer to the fire pit. Even when the fire was low, the peasants, those who had lived long enough to see the patterns, knew what was coming. Not just frost, but hunger, cold, and something else too. Something that didn't quite have a name. They didn't speak of it, but they could feel it. In the way the crows circled slower, in the way the dogs barked less, in the way even laughter seemed to echo longer before disappearing into silence. One morning, a child coughed. A small, sharp sound in a quiet room. No one panicked. Children coughed all the time. But that night, the same child shivered, even beneath 2 blankets. The mother held them close, poured broth from a bone they couldn't afford to spare, whispered prayers into their tangled hair, and hoped it would pass. By dawn, the child was burning with fever. The room stank of sweat and fear. And still, no one said the word. They didn't have a word for it. Not yet. Outside, frost touched the top of the grass. Just a breath of white, gone by mid-morning. But it was enough. The field, once golden, was now brown. The wheat had been harvested. The stalks burned or bundled. What remained was earth raw, open, tired. The villagers began to speak more softly. They tightened their belts. They watered the broth. And they waited. Then, the second child fell ill. Not from the same house. Not the same symptoms. This one did not shiver. He bled. From the nose, then the mouth. The elder said it was bad humours. The midwife said it was the devil. The priest said nothing at all. He just lit a candle. And that's when it began. Not the plague. Not officially. Not with a declaration or a scream. But with silence. And firelight. And the quiet understanding that something had changed. Something had arrived. It began with a cloth, hung over the doorway, black, frayed, and still damp with the night's dew. Not many saw it at first. It was the back hut, the one near the old stone wall, where the willow tree leaned crooked, and the chimney smoked a little less each day. Inside, the mother no longer rose with the sun. She didn't sweep the floor, didn't heat the morning broth, didn't hum when she churned the butter, because she didn't churn anything anymore. She lay on the straw mat, wrapped in wool, and breathed like someone dragging water uphill. Heavy, reluctant, exhausted. The father stayed near her, rarely spoke, only left to fetch water or to check on the child, who had now taken to sitting at the threshold, watching the clouds drift past with wide, silent eyes. The candle came 3 nights later, a single stub of tallow, placed in a wooden bowl filled with water, set on the outer windowsill, not to guide spirits, not for prayers, but as a warning. They had no sign to hang, no letter to write, so they lit a light. It meant, don't come closer, not out of cruelty, but kindness and fear. Word spread slowly. Someone saw the flame while fetching kindling, told their brother, who told the blacksmith's boy, who told the woman selling carrots near the well. By dusk, no one went near the house. Children were told not to look at it. Adults spoke of it only in whispers, as if louder words might spread the sickness. They avoided the path entirely, took the longer way through the fields, even if it meant muddy boots and torn hems. Inside, the fever climbed. The mother no longer spoke. The child coughed dryly, eyes glazed like old glass. The father sat with his back to the wall, knife across his knees not as a weapon, but as something solid to hold. And the candle kept burning, flickering, waning, but refusing to die. At dawn, a sparrow flew into the window. It struck the pane with a dull thud and dropped into the sill, its tiny wings twitching. Then still. The child said, "That's a bad sign." And the father did not disagree. He stepped outside, walked down to the stream, kneeled, dipped his hands into the cold, as if trying to wash something that wasn't dirt. He looked up. The village was waking. A boy ran past with a bucket. A woman hung linens on a line. The world kept going, but his had stopped. He walked home slowly, past the candle, now a pool of wax. He did not light another. There was no need. The silence was loud enough. Inside, the mother had passed. The child was asleep, and the man sat beside her, not weeping, not yet. He simply held her hand, still warm, still here almost. At first, they still called it a cold, a fever, a bad season. They wrapped rosemary in cloth and hung it in the doorway, burned dried sage in clay pots, whispered blessings when the wind blew from the east, and hoped, as humans always do, at the beginning of every plague. But then came the third house, and the fourth, and suddenly there weren't enough candles, weren't enough prayers, weren't enough explanations. The healer tried. She brought vinegar and bark, scraped mold from bread and pressed it into wounds, wrote symbols in chalk on lintels. But her voice shook when she told people, "It's passing, it will pass," because she no longer believed it herself. The symptoms changed. One child bled from the gums. An old woman collapsed mid-step in the market. A man found his wife stiff and cold before dawn, though she had been speaking to him the evening before. It wasn't just cough now, not just fever. It was swelling, black spots, vomiting, terrors in the night, and the dreams. Everyone spoke of the dreams, of rats, of black wings, of voices whispering under the bed. The priest, Father Anselm, stood at the chapel steps every morning and spoke of faith, of testing, of the Lord's mysterious will. But fewer people came each day, not because they no longer believed, but because they were too weak to walk. Fear changed the village. Doors stayed shut. Windows were shuttered even at noon. The well was deserted. Each home sent one person, masked and gloved, to fill jugs quickly and return in silence. Neighbors stopped waving. They stopped making eye contact. One woman screamed when a boy reached out to touch her apron. And yet, some still tried to hold on to kindness. A girl left bread outside a home with a candle in the window. She never knocked, never waited, just placed the food and walked away. The next morning, the bread was gone, but no one knew if it had been taken by the living or the hungry dead. Rumors spread faster than the sickness. Some said the Jews poisoned the wells. Some blamed cats. Some said it came from the stars. A misalignment of Saturn and Mars. A curse. A punishment. Witchcraft. An old man accused his own daughter of bringing the sickness. Said she had spoken to birds. Watched her burn without blinking. No one stopped him. Because when the world begins to end, people grasp at anything. Even fire. Even cruelty. But others lit candles, not as warnings, but as symbols. symbols that someone inside still lived, still fought, still hoped. Each flame was a defiance, a whisper into the darkness. We are still here. We are not yet gone. Not all of us. There were no funerals. Not because they didn't care, but because they couldn't. No choirs. No incense. No eulogies whispered beneath stained glass. Only earth. And time. And the silence of a village forgetting how to say goodbye. It began with the bell. Each time someone died, the chapel bell would toll. Once for the soul. Once for the family. Once for God. But the bell began to ring too often. And then, not at all. The priest, old and frail, rang it until his hands bled. Until he collapsed in the belfry. Until no one came to help him back down. Now it hangs silent, rust creeping down the rope like ivy. The graves multiplied. At first, the villagers tried to bury their dead with care. Wrapped in linen, a small cross carved, names spoken aloud, a song, a prayer. But the ground hardened. The bodies came faster, and the hands grew fewer, so they dug wider, deeper, longer trenches, side by side. No markers, no ceremony. They called them plague pits, though no one ever used the word out loud. Farewells were whispered in corners. A daughter kissing a fevered forehead. A father placing a carved toy into a small hand. A friend lighting a candle. And leaving the door open. Just long enough for the light to spill out into the road. Sometimes, the sick knew they were dying. They asked for nothing, only that someone stay near, even if just beyond the doorway, to hear their last breath. Other times, death came so fast. There was no time for words, no time for tears, only the hollow sound of lungs stopping, and the terrible stillness that follows. The children stopped asking questions. They no longer said, "Where's Mama?" or "Will grandfather wake up?" They learned, faster than they should have, what silence meant, what it looked like, what it smelled like. They learned that when someone coughed and didn't speak afterward, you didn't go near. And when someone cried in the night, you stayed quiet, even if you wanted to hold them, even if they were your brother. One woman, Marta, buried 3 in 5 days. Her husband, her daughter, then her baby boy. She dug herself, with bare hands, when the spade broke. No one helped, not because they didn't love her, but because love had become too dangerous. After the 3rd grave, she sat by the door, didn't move, didn't eat. The 4th day, she was gone. They say she walked into the forest barefoot, in the direction the birds flew when they left the fields. No one went after her. The next day, snow fell. Just a little, enough to cover the graves like linen. Even in all this, there were still moments of grace. A boy left an apple at his neighbor's doorstep. A girl sang to her dying grandmother. A stranger stood beside a body in the road until someone came to carry it home. These things happened. Not often, but enough. Enough to remind the village that they were still human, still alive, still remembering what it meant to say goodbye. Even without words, there is a kind of silence that only comes after sorrow. It doesn't fall like a storm. It settles like dust, like snow, like the soft closing of a door that will not open again. The village still stood. The huts were there. The well still bubbled. The field still stretched, waiting. But it was not the same place. It had been emptied, not just of people, but of sound, of laughter, of the little things that made a village feel alive. The bark of a dog, the hiss of bread hitting hot stone, the argument over who trampled the garden path. Now there were echoes and ghosts, not the kind in stories, but the kind that lived in memory, in habit, in corners. Children's toys lay untouched in the dirt. A skipping rope tangled in thorns. A doll made of straw, half buried in ash. No one picked them up. A house with an open door never closed. The fire inside had long since gone cold, but no one entered. No one dared claim it. Some homes had been locked from the inside, their inhabitants still within, unmoved, undisturbed. Time passed them by, respectfully, fearfully. The survivors carried something behind their eyes. It wasn't just grief. It was recognition of how close they had come, of who they had lost, of who they had become. They walked slower, spoke less, blinked more often, as if to clear away what they no longer wished to see. Some refused to speak names. Others whispered them at night, like prayers. And still others began to forget. Not because they wanted to, but because forgetting felt like healing. Even if it was a lie, the priest no longer held morning services. He simply opened the chapel door, lit one candle, and sat on the step in silence. Those who needed it joined him. Some knelt. Some stood. One man sat and stared into nothing for an hour, and then left without a word. The chapel bell remained still, but the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. One woman began to sing again. Not loudly, not cheerfully, but softly. A lullaby, barely more than breath. While stirring porridge, while tending a wounded sheep, while planting new onions near the fence. Her voice was cracked, but it was something. Her neighbor heard it, hummed along, then forgot herself and laughed. Only once. It startled the chickens. And that was how it began. Not with a grand return, but a flicker, a ripple in still water. They were not healed. Not yet. But they were no longer only hollow. They were waiting, like the earth waits beneath snow. Still, but alive. When the sickness was at its worst, people prayed. Not out of habit but desperation. Some prayed to saints, some to the Virgin, some directly to God, demanding answers. None came. So now, after the silence, they asked different questions. Not, why did they die? But, why did I live? The priest had changed. Once, Father Anselm's voice had boomed across the pews. He spoke with fire, with conviction, with the weight of holy certainty. Now, his sermons were whispers. Soft, wavering, like someone unsure whether the words would hold together at all. He stopped quoting scripture, started speaking plainly. Less, thou shalt not, and more, I do not know why. And strangely, the villagers listened more, because now he was one of them. Not above, not beyond, just a man, breathing through grief like everyone else. Some stopped coming to the chapel altogether. Not in anger, not in protest. They simply couldn't believe anymore. Not after watching their child die in their arms. Not after digging a grave alone at midnight. Not after watching a priest lay hands and pray, and nothing changed. Instead, they found belief in other places. One woman carved symbols into her fence posts. Another tied bells in her apple tree to ward off bad spirits. A boy left milk outside the door each night, for the ones who might take me if I forget. It wasn't the old faith, but it was faith. And sometimes that was enough. Fear took new shapes. Where once it had worn the face of illness, now it looked like strangers, like unfamiliar footsteps, like a cough in a room too quiet. People began to build higher fences, not to keep others out, but to keep fear in, to contain it, like smoke in a jar. There were whispers again, of witches, of bad omens, of people who never fell sick and so must be guilty of something. In one village nearby, they burned a woman, not because she had done anything, but because they needed someone to blame. Fire gave them a sense of control. It crackled louder than fear. It brightened the night, and when the flames died down, they felt for a moment cleansed. But fire doesn't heal. It only clears. And sometimes it scars what's left behind. Still, not all fear turned cruel. Some of it softened into caution, into tenderness, into the quiet rituals of care. A girl who had lost her voice from grief began leaving flowers on windowsills. No notes, just color, a reminder that beauty still dared to bloom. An old man built birdhouses along the village path. He said, if they return to nest, we'll know it's safe to sing again. And the birds did come. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to believe, even if only for a moment, that the worst had passed. It didn't happen all at once. Spring never does. It arrives shyly, step by step. First a thaw, then a bloom, then a breeze that smells like something living. The fields, once brown and cracked, began to soften under the sun's touch. Shoots of green pushed through the soil, hesitant, but determined. The villagers, too, began to shift. Not with joy. Not yet. But with movement. With breath. As if remembering that they were still here. The first market day since the plague drew only a handful of people. No music. No jugglers. No color. Just quiet barter. A few sacks of flour. Salted fish. An old woman with fresh eggs, eyes always scanning the crowd, as if expecting someone who never arrived. And yet, someone smiled. Just once. At a baby too young to know what had happened. A laugh bubbled up, nervous, apologetic, but real. It echoed across the square, and no one scolded it. Children began to play again. Not in crowds. Not loudly, but a game of stones near the fence. A chase through tall grass. A whistle carved into a reed, shared between siblings. They didn't talk about the ones missing, but they left space for them in their games, just in case they came back. And when the sun set, they went home to houses that had not known laughter in months. Their footsteps sounded different now, lighter, less like survival, more like living. New rituals emerged. Where once there were candles for warning, now there were candles for remembrance. Each home placed one in the window on the full moon, not because of religion, but rhythm, a way to say, "You are not forgotten." Names were spoken aloud again, sometimes in prayer, sometimes in song, sometimes in tears, but they were spoken, and that, in itself, was a kind of resurrection. The healer returned to her garden, replanted herbs, built new trellises. She didn't speak of cures anymore. She spoke of comfort, of warmth, of making the body feel welcome again. People brought her bread in thanks, and she gave them chamomile. Not for sickness, but for sleep. Because now, sleep no longer meant fear. It meant rest. The priest carved a bench from fallen wood, placed it near the stream. No sermons, no expectations. He sat there every afternoon. People joined him when they wished. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. But in the quiet, something grew. Not faith in the old way. Not fear in the new. But a trust. In time. In earth. In the slow unfolding of days. One afternoon, a traveler arrived. Dusty boots. A fiddle on his back. He asked for water. Stayed the night. And in the morning, he played. Not well. Not grand. But with joy. Children danced. A woman wept. A man offered him bread. And the traveler smiled. Then continued down the road. His tune trailing behind him like birdsong. The plough creaked again. Not as a symbol. Not as a metaphor. But as real wood, dragged through real soil, by a hand that had buried more than seed. The field had waited. It always did. No matter who came. Or didn't. The peasant stood in that same plot. Older. Thinner. But still standing. Each furrow turned was not a return to normal. Because there was no such thing now. It was a beginning. Different. Heavier. But real. Some who once worked beside him were gone. Some huts were silent still. But others stirred. Children, now tall enough to carry buckets. Wives, once paralyzed by grief, now grinding flour again. The first seeds dropped into the earth like small prayers. Not for abundance. Just enough. The air smelled of ash, rain, and something faintly green. Life uninvited, unpromised, but here. That day, 3 others came to the fields. No words. Just the rhythm of work shared between survivors. One paused, looked up, and asked, almost as a joke, "Do you think it remembers us?" The others didn't answer. Because maybe the land did remember. Not as humans remember, but as soil remembers touch. As roots remember rain. By midday, the work paused. Not from exhaustion, but from awe. Because across the ridge, a line of geese flew in V formation. And below them, the orchard had begun to bloom. No one spoke. No one needed to. The world, it seemed, had not ended. Just folded in on itself for a time. Now it was unfolding again. Slowly. Carefully. Like a hand unclenching, That night, they returned home sore and silent. But when one child asked, "Will we plant again tomorrow?" the peasant answered, "Yes," and meant it. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't salvation. It was simply the truth. The earth was still turning. So they would too. They were born in the aftermath. They didn't remember the candle in the window, or the silence at the chapel, or the heavy breathing in the night. But they saw the eyes of those who did. The children who came after the plague were different. Not because they were stronger or smarter, but because the world they inherited was stitched from fragments. A father who flinched at coughs, a mother who counted heads every morning, a neighbor who spoke to graves more than to people. The children learned not through stories, but through the quiet. They learned what not to ask, where not to go, which fences were decorated with flowers and why. They played, of course. Children always do. Laughter returned before language, running before reflection. But their games had edges. A hiding place became a tomb. A chasing game became flight from invisible things. A ring of daisy chains became a ring of protection. No one taught them that. They simply knew. In school, such as it was, they were taught to read from scraps. A friar came once a week, bringing paper softened from use, ink smudged by countless fingers. He didn't teach scripture anymore. He taught names, dates, stories of fields, of rivers, of grandparents they never met. He said, "Write them down, because no one else will." So the children scribbled. My uncle had yellow shoes. There was once a girl who made the best turnip pie. My father didn't smile until I turned 7. They weren't facts, but they were truths, and they were precious. Some children asked why so many graves had no names. Their parents would pause, then say, "Because we ran out of wood," or "Because we didn't know who to ask," or simply, "We remember without needing stone." And somehow, the children understood. They built little shrines from sticks, left flowers where the grass grew tallest. They spoke names in whispers, names they made up just to fill the silence. As they grew, they began to question more. Why had no one left the village? Why were certain huts always empty? Why did the priest never ring the bell anymore? And sometimes, someone would answer. Other times, they wouldn't. But even in silence, the truth seeped through. In the way hands tightened on tools, in the way a song always stopped before the final verse. One boy drew pictures in the dirt. Sick people, angels, a house with smoke curling up, and then nothing. His mother saw, said nothing, but brought him an old charcoal stub the next day. And paper. He drew every day after that. Years later, his drawings would be shown to children of the next village over. One would say, "This is how I remember too," even if they hadn't lived it. That's how memory works. Passed not through blood, but through story, through art, through play. One girl, Miriam, asked her grandmother why she planted roses only on one side of the house. Her grandmother answered, "Because that's the side your aunt used to sit." Miriam never met that aunt, but every spring she watered the roses, twice, just in case. The new generation bore no scars, but they carried shapes, traces, echoes, and in doing so, they ensured the village would never forget. Not with grief, but with gentleness, with resilience, with life. The road was never wide, just 2 worn lines in the grass, beaten down by cartwheels and footsteps over years. But after the plague it seemed wider, as if it had been waiting. The first to go was Thomas, not because he had no ties, but because he had too many. The hut his wife died in, the bench where his daughter coughed her last, the tree he had planted when he was 12, now shedding leaves as if in mourning. One morning he packed a small bag. Dried beans, a piece of bread, a blanket, no goodbyes. He simply looked back once, nodded, and walked away. Some said he went south toward the rivers. Others said he joined the monks near the coast. One rumor claimed he became a gravedigger for the cities, but in truth, no one knew, and that was the first lesson for those who left. Once you go, you become a story. One morning he packed a small bag. Dried beans, a piece of bread, a blanket, no goodbyes. He simply looked back once, nodded, and walked away. Some said he went south toward the rivers. Others said he joined the monks near the coast. One rumor claimed he became a gravedigger for the cities, but in truth, no one knew, and that was the first lesson for those who left. Once you go, you become a story. Others followed. A pair of sisters who had no parents left. A boy with a crooked foot who dreamed of the sea. A woman whose silence had grown too loud to stay. They left in twos and threes, always quietly, always early. Sometimes they returned just for a day, bringing strange cloth, or new songs, or accents shaped by far winds, but their eyes never settled, because the village was no longer their home.
One man came back just once. He stood in front of his old house, now caved in, ivy thick. He placed a stone at the door, kissed the lintel, and left again, without a word. That stone is still there. No one moves it. Some of the travelers sent letters, or drawings, or tokens. One arrived with a lock of baby hair, another a pressed flower from a field no one here had seen. Each item was kept in a box in the chapel, not sacred, but honored, proof that the memory of the village had spread, like seeds on the wind. One girl, just 15, said she wanted to see the mountains. No one stopped her. They only gave her a pouch of salt, and a small cloth doll with button eyes. She returned 5 winters later, not with riches, but with stories. She became the village storyteller, not of this village, but of others. And through her tales, the village became larger, not in size, but in heart. Those who left were not forgotten, nor idolized. They were written into the corners of conversations, mentioned in prayers, dreamt of on quiet nights. Some became myths, others cautionary tales, but all were remembered, because leaving, too, was a kind of bravery. The village did not rebuild itself. No wind carried lumber. No saint dropped roof beams from the clouds. No king sent gold or grain. The village returned, because they stayed. Their names weren't sung. There were no feasts in their honor, but their fingerprints were everywhere, in the repaired door hinge, in the planks mended with scavenged nails, in the bread, still warm at dawn. These weren't heroes. They were survivors, bricklayers of memory, carpenters of routine. One woman, Annabeth, had lost everyone, her husband, her 3 children, her voice. She did not speak for nearly a year. Then, one morning, she began planting flowers around every abandoned house. No one asked why. No one told her to stop. By the second spring, she wasn't the only one. Those who stayed learned to live beside silence. They hung laundry beside empty homes, sang lullabies to children not yet born, repaired fences that had no cattle. It wasn't denial. It was duty, because to stay was to believe that life, even after so much death, still mattered. Some rebuilt the school. Some reopened the bakery. Some rewrote the village laws. They did not ask permission. They simply began. The old bell tower rang again, not because anyone fixed it, but because one man climbed it and shouted. His voice cracked, but it carried, and that was enough. Those who stayed kept the names. In stories, in books, in the way they spoke about directions. Turn left where the old barber used to live. The well near Sarah's bench. The grove that belonged to the twins. No plaques, just presence. A kind of immortality rooted in routine. One winter, a young boy asked why they didn't move. His grandfather, who had shoveled ash with bare hands, said, "Because this place remembers me, and I remember it." The boy didn't understand, but later, when he repaired a shutter by himself, he began to. The village didn't return to how it was. That was never possible, but it found something else. A new rhythm. Softer, slower, but steady. Like a heartbeat after grief. Those who stayed became the archive. The keepers of soil. The guardians of what mattered, even when no one was watching. Their gift wasn't knowledge. It was continuity. And without them, the village would have become only memory. There are no statues for them. No songs. No pages in textbooks. Not even a scribbled footnote in the margins of kings. And yet, they held the world together. They were the hands that baked bread when no one was hungry. The backs that lifted stone when no one watched. The voices that hummed lullabies too old to trace. History forgets them not out of malice. but because history prefers loudness. Wars, crowns, dates. But survival? That's quiet. It happens in whispers, in stitches, in daily returns to the same tasks. Think of the woman who spun wool while her heart broke, the boy who filled the well every morning and never once was thanked, the man who carved a toy for a child that wasn't his. Their names weren't recorded, but their actions were repeated, over and over again, until a broken village became a home again. That is legacy. That is impact. That is history, the kind that lives in the bones of buildings, not in the ink of books. Some gravestones cracked. Some were never carved. Some lives passed like the wind, warm one moment, then gone. But they left fingerprints. In habits. In place names. In the way someone still braids their hair the old way, or lights the fire with 2 matches instead of 3. When people say, life went on, they rarely ask how. This is how. A girl walked to the stream every morning with 2 buckets and never complained. A man mended shoes for those who couldn't pay. A widow raised her sister's child without being asked. None of these made headlines, but they held up the world. We often say, the people, but forget they had names. Anna, Gareth, Mila, Jonas, Brielle, Thomas. People who never ruled, never conquered, never even traveled far, but who stood up every single day and chose to try. And now, they're gone. But perhaps, not entirely, because you are here, and you listened, and maybe, just maybe, you'll remember one of them tonight. Not by name, but by feeling. And that is how stories survive. Not with ink, but with breath. So tonight, as the fire fades, and your eyes grow heavy, know that you've walked beside someone whose life will never be written down, but who mattered, deeply, and in remembering them, you give them something more enduring than history. You give them peace. Thank you for listening. May your dreams be quiet. May your breath be easy. And may tomorrow find you, whole, and ready to begin again. Good night.